Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, and you're watching CBC News BC. I am Jessica Chung here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Lots on the go today, so let's get right to it. In an effort to reduce reliance on the U.S., Premier David Eby has announced a trade mission to India this week. A small delegation, including Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon, will visit New Delhi, Punjab, Mumbai, and Bangalore. Eby says the trip will focus on diversifying trade for BC's LNG and forestry sectors.
By expanding our trade with India, we are able to provide support to communities across the province that have been particularly impacted by Trump's tariffs, especially in the forestry sector, which is a big focus of this mission.
Now, BC is the largest trading partner India has in all of Canada, and Eby's last trade mission was in June to Japan, South Korea, and Malaysia. And the woman charged in relation to a series of stabbing attacks in Vancouver's Yaletown neighborhood back in October has now pleaded guilty. 35-year-old Tamara Hamlin was arrested on October 10th after 3 people were taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries, and 4 additional victims came forward after the incident. Now, the victims were 5 men and 2 women ranging in age from 23 to 59. Hamlin was later charged with 4 counts of assault with a weapon and 2 counts of assault. Now, she entered guilty pleas to all 6 charges last month and is expected to be sentenced at the end of March. Wet and wintry weather is hitting BC's south coast this morning, and Environment Canada has issued rain and snowfall warnings for several areas, warning of up to 70 millimeters of rain in some parts, and at higher elevations, it could come down as snow.
So far, we're just focused on kind of this next 12 hours. We're early morning to late morning where the snow potential is highest, because that's when the system is currently moving through. But as we look into tonight, into early tomorrow morning, there's not a whole lot of precipitation expected through the area. So snowfall there's a low chance for higher terrain seeing snowfall, but the precipitation intensity will be very low.
Now, snow is falling on some major highways, including the Sea to Sky Highway between Squamish and Whistler. Up to 25 centimeters is expected to fall in the Whistler area. There's also a snowfall warning for the Coquihalla Highway between Hope and Merritt, where 30 centimeters of snow could fall through until tomorrow morning. And here's something that you don't see a pod of orcas do very often: rub their bellies on pebbles along a beach. And some on the Sunshine Coast got a close-up view of that. Take a look at this. That's a pod of northern resident killer whales that were seen giving themselves a belly rub at Secret Beach near Gibsons. Now, those who saw it say that this is a once-in-a-lifetime sighting, and experts say that this behavior is thought to be unique to just this type of killer whale.
Killer whales have very active skin, so their skin is sloughing all the time. Rubbing their bodies on rocks, like these smooth pebbles, it may help them expedite that exfoliation. Amongst all the different killer whale populations around the world, there's only a couple that have been observed doing this behavior. So it's very specialized, it's very unique, it's not that common, and so it's very cool to see and record when it does happen.
How amazing is some of that, Viz? Now, he says that the pebbles on the beach have to be just right for the northern resident killer whales to use. And that pod that you saw there, the A5 pod, are known to like the ones on the Sunshine Coast. And that's it for now. You are watching CBC News BC. I am Jessica Chung. Don't go anywhere, because BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Pipeline proponents like Alberta Premier Danielle Smith say the U.S. intervention in Venezuela underlines the need for a new pipeline to export Canadian oil to new markets outside the U.S. President Donald Trump has made clear his hopes of revitalizing Venezuela's oil industry, but the BC government remains opposed to a new pipeline to the North Coast. We're taking your calls on the open line. Is there now more pressure on Canada to build that new pipeline? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. You can call us right now. Does the U.S. action in Venezuela put more pressure to build a pipeline to BC's coast? What does the United States play for Venezuelan oil mean for the Canadian economy? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also dial 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, this morning, BC Premier David Eby spoke to reporters and was asked about this. He maintained his opposition, stressing yet again the lack of a private sector proponent. He called for a pivot in investments away from the proposed bitumen pipeline.
There's nobody who wants to build it from the private sector. If the price of oil is staying low and continues to stay low, I expect there to be calls for another publicly funded pipeline when we don't even use the one that we have to full capacity. So if we're going to do public investment into our resources here in Canada, I think it might be time to pivot that discussion to a refinery. We still buy oil products from the United States. I don't understand why, if we're talking about massive public investment into supporting Albertans in this fragile global time, we can't talk about supporting all Canadians with oil and gas products that are made right here at home.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mark Carney also spoke to reporters in Paris today, and he said he's not worried about the prospect of more Venezuelan oil production and that the memorandum of understanding he signed with Alberta is part of Canada's efforts to boost infrastructure.
Canadian oil will be competitive because it is low risk, clearly low risk, low cost, the marginal cost. So we welcome the prospect of peace, a peaceful transition, democratic Venezuela. We welcome the prospect of greater prosperity in Venezuela, but we also see the competitiveness of Canadian oil, and we're investing, or we're putting in place measures so that that's going to happen. And in that context, a pipeline and exports to Asia, we've got competitive product, and we'd be diversifying our markets, and that's one of the reasons why we signed the comprehensive MOU with Alberta. So we'd be working towards that.
Meanwhile, opposition Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre posted a letter to social media urging Carney's Liberals to approve a bitumen pipeline. He wrote, "Every barrel the U.S. sources from Venezuela could mean one less barrel these refineries would buy from Canada. We therefore need new markets to sell to, and we need them quickly. We need to move millions of barrels a day to overseas markets quickly to reduce our dependence on the U.S. market. That's why Canada must immediately approve a pipeline to the Pacific coast." We are taking your calls on this. Does the U.S. action in Venezuela put more pressure to build an oil pipeline from Alberta to BC's coast? And what does the U.S. play for the Venezuelan oil industry mean for the Canadian economy? You can call us now, 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950, or email bctoday@cbc.ca. If you're joining us on TikTok, you can leave a comment there. My guest is Werner Antweiler. He's the chair of the Strategy and Business Economics Division at UBC Sauder School of Business. Werner, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
First of all, we've heard U.S. President Donald Trump being very clear that oil has been a factor in his administration's action in Venezuela, in the ouster of Nicolas Maduro. He says he wants U.S. oil companies to go into the country and that he says they would spend billions, earn huge profits for themselves, for people in Venezuela. How feasible is that plan?
It doesn't look at all feasible. These statements that are coming from the White House seem in complete misunderstanding of the situation in Venezuela and the state of the oil production in Venezuela. The industry has deteriorated significantly over the last 15 years. There has been a massive brain drain of expertise in the oil industry, and therefore it would take many, many years to rebuild the industry in Venezuela to a level it has seen at the beginning of the 2000s. Right now, output is down to about 1 million barrels a day. It used to be around 3 million barrels a day. So, and that deterioration is not something you can flip a switch and then overnight you're going to have the oil taps flowing in various directions. I should also mention that you need inputs for producing oil, because what Venezuela is producing is heavy crude. To transport it, you need naphtha, which is a material that is a diluting agent, and that they're actually short on. So there's a lot of infrastructure that is just not in place to produce more oil rapidly. The best case scenarios is that they maybe, with some repairs, increase production from 1 million to 1.2 million. That is all that experts see is feasible in the short term. Anything more would require in the order of magnitude of $100 billion or more to get back to the levels we have seen at the beginning of our century.
I've certainly heard that figure, and how long something that kind of project could actually take, that kind of revitalization. At the same time, you mentioned that heavy crude, it is the same oil as Canada's oil patch produces. Eventually, at some point, does it pose a risk to Canadian oil producers and more competition for oil producers here in Canada?
Well, keep in mind that we have infrastructure in place to ship our oil to the United States refineries. And that is an advantage of locked-in infrastructure that already exists that makes Canadian oil very, very competitive to any alternatives, including Venezuela, which would have to be shipped through maritime corridors. So all that actually gives us a foot in the door that is going to be very hard to push out, because it's a cost advantage that is now baked in. There are opportunities for Canadian producers to continue delivering oil to these refineries. The refineries are adjusted to the Canadian mix in particular, and I just don't see how Venezuelan oil is suddenly going to become a whole lot more competitive than it actually is.
So what do you make of calls then, this renewed pressure that we hear from, for example, the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, that this renews, it highlights the urgency for a new pipeline to BC's coast?
These statements are very opportunistic. Now, here's a situation where it looks like there may be some change when in fact it's not, but it's some opportunity for pushing an agenda in one direction or another. The case for building another pipeline to the West Coast hinges on economic merit, and that economic merit is simply not there. As the Premier was actually saying earlier today, there are no companies lining up who want to build that. And if it means building such a pipeline with public money, I think there are many other good destinations for using that money, from healthcare to other things that we desperately need more infrastructure in. So the notion of this pipeline being built to the West Coast would create new economic opportunities. Well, where are the investors who are lining up to do that? I don't see them. There are none on the horizon. And the fact remains that building such a pipeline would be so expensive, as we have seen with the Trans Mountain expansion at a cost of over $30 billion, that this erodes most of the gains that could be had from accessing markets overseas. So in the end, there is no economic case that stands on its merits.
Many calls are coming in asking our audience, does the U.S. action in Venezuela put more pressure on Canada to build a new pipeline to BC's coast? What does it mean for the Canadian economy? Our numbers are 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Now, before I go to calls here, as they are lined up, I'm going to play a clip from a colleague of yours, actually, Professor Antweiler, Sauder School of Business lecturer Adam Pankratz, who spoke on the early edition this morning about how U.S. access of the Venezuelan oil industry could impact Canada.
Venezuela was a large supplier of U.S. oil for a long time. There were major oil producers who were in Venezuela, which were then expropriated when and thrown out of the country under Chavez and then Maduro in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So they have a history of operating in that country. But I think the larger issue is that the United States, consumes a lot of oil, and very importantly, their refineries are designed to process the heavy bitumen crude which Venezuela and Canada produce. And that's why this issue is raising alarm bells in Canada, because Venezuela, if it gets its production back online, the type of oil that it produces is direct competition for Canada.
So a differing point of view there. Now you talked about added materials that are needed, right, to be able to process that heavy crude. How do you see this moving forward, given what we are hearing as well from energy analysts?
Yeah, so there's this big if. Can Venezuela actually produce more oil? And the quick answer is no, not really. Even with some repairs, they could crank out a little bit more, maybe 20% more from what they do today, but they cannot get back to the levels we have seen 15 or 20 years ago, because the infrastructure has deteriorated. The people who were the experts in the industry have left. There has been this massive brain drain. And there's even infrastructure shortages on electricity that you also need to generate various output. All these infrastructure deficits make it extremely unlikely that Venezuela is going to be able to crank up output in the next number of years. And that means in the short term, there's certainly no threat to the Canadian oil industry. Even the long term, the advantage that we currently have with the existing infrastructure, the pipeline infrastructure to deliver oil to refineries in the United States isn't going to go away. That infrastructure is already there. And that keeps our oil very, very competitive. U.S. refineries aren't going to buy more expensive oil when they can get cheaper oil from Canada.
Let's take some calls now. My guest, Werner Antweiler, professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business, chair of the Strategy and Business Economics Division at that school. Taking your calls, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. Let's head to Calgary, in fact, and James is on the line. Hi, James.
Hello. It seems like Energy East, the pipeline to the east, seems to have disappeared off the radar. I don't know why. But Alberta, I believe, is potentially going to be a have-not province in 5 years if the Americans do get the Venezuelan oil. They can build up that industry very quickly. Trump has suggested he will even use government funds to do it. And I worked in the oil patch pipeline industry, and I know how fast we can put pipe in the ground. And I can see Alberta requiring equalization payments in about 5 years if the Americans get a hold of that oil.
So you're worried about the impact?
I am very worried about the impact on Alberta and Canada. And, if that Venezuelan oil flows, I believe they can get it up to 3.5 million barrels in 3 years. That will force Alberta to discount its oil further. It's already discounted about $13 or $14 a barrel. For every dollar oil is discounted in Alberta, the Alberta government loses $600 million in royalties. And if it gets discounted double, this province is going to be in such a deficit situation, they won't be able to crawl out of it, even if they put on a bigger sales tax than BC.
Okay. Impact on Alberta. Okay, James, thank you for the call from Calgary. And Energy East would have delivered diluted bitumen from Western Canada to Eastern Canada. And so the discussion from Alberta is that this proposed pipeline would bring oil to BC's North Coast for export to Asian markets. So perhaps that's the difference there. Werner, did you want to weigh in on that, on what the prospects could be for Alberta's oil industry?
Yeah, there have always been two directions where Albertan oil can go in addition to the United States. One is to international markets, and the other direction would be to domestic markets, because essentially Canada is divided in two. The western oil goes essentially to the United States, but in the east of Canada, we are importing oil from all kinds of places around the world. So there is always actually an argument to be made to enhance our energy security to actually bring Albertan oil to markets in eastern and central Canada. We haven't done that. And that's an interesting kind of question about the economic merits, but also the political feasibility that would actually make that happen.
Thank you very much for the call. Rob is next in Chilliwack. Your thoughts on the any increased pressure for a new pipeline to BC's coast? Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Yes.
I support pipelines 100%. As a matter of fact, I not only support the Energy West to Prince Rupert, I support Energy East, and I'm going to call it myself, I support Energy Northeast through to a pipeline up to Hudson Bay. We need to get our resources to market. This is a prime example of watching, quite frankly, I'll call it how I see it, Michelle. We're watching a madman here. We cannot trust the Americans. Not only do we need pipelines, Michelle, we need refineries to refine our own oil into gasoline, into diesel fuel. This is truly what I believe. And like I say, Donald Trump has showed he's played his hand here. And we're dealing with a very unstable person. We need to get our resources to Asia. Countries like that. India will buy our oil. And Canada has to stop tripping over their own feet. We need to get out of the way. And quite frankly, Michelle, I'll tell you straight up, as a taxpayer, I would support a taxpayer-funded pipelines, as a matter of fact. 100%.
In addition to
Michelle. Thank you.
Trans Mountain. Chris, thank you very much. You know, I'm going to jump on that point about refineries, because that's something that the Premier actually talked about this morning as well. As he announced the trade mission to India, and he was asked about this, he said, why not? Let's refocus on actually building refineries. What about that as an option, Werner?
Yeah, so any investments are kind of long-term. The situation that we're dealing with is what happened in the United States and now Venezuela. But when we build new infrastructure, this is a time horizon of 10 to 20 years, and refineries, and that's the time horizon, they need to last for 30, 40 years. And the question is the market there? And the answer is nobody has been building new refineries because there is no new demand for this capacity here in Canada. That has been the problem. There is no economic case that has been convincing enough for investors to line up and say, yes, we're going to do that. Yes, this is going to make economic sense. It just hasn't happened. The money isn't there. The only refinery that was built was propped up with government subsidies.
It is something we hear about when gas prices go up, right? I have people calling into this show, why don't we have more than the 2 refineries in BC? I mean, when it comes to demand, we just heard this, that we need to be increasing, that there is demand there, that there is demand internationally for Canadian oil. Is there an argument to be made that we do need more refineries in BC?
Well, maybe not for refineries. The question is there a market for our oil? And the answer is, of course, yes. There is a market. The U.S. is our largest market, obviously, because of the proximity to this market. Any international market needs to have a stronger economic case, that it has to overcome the transportation cost to actually get it to that market. So here we are competing internationally, and the profitability really is hinging on the price of oil internationally. One of the previous speakers mentioned the discount that Canadian oil has, and that is because we are producing a certain type of oil, a heavy crude, that has a quality difference that makes it less attractive. Not all refineries in the world can process this oil. There are only a number of refineries that can process this type of heavy crude, and that means our markets are kind of limited in that regard to finding those refineries that actually can process that oil.
We actually have another question on refineries now from Kent in Vancouver. Hi, Kent. I hope I didn't steal your thunder there.
No, I'm here and I'm listening to the show. Thank you
Great.
very much. And my question was, Canada ships raw logs by shiploads across the sea. We ship raw bitumen everywhere. All the talk is about pipelines everywhere, so we can ship our resources out raw. Why don't we build a refinery? And there was a partial answer to that question, in perhaps southern Alberta or somewhere local, so we can produce it ourselves and export finished materials. We make the money.
Yeah, Ken, thank you very much. So again, going to that demand, can increasing refineries help meet international demand, I think is what he's asking there.
Yeah, so when it comes to refineries, we can actually and do sell refined products internationally to a small extent, but it's mostly refined where it's being used. So most refineries are close to where the demand is. You don't typically build refineries to export it over a long distance. Mostly what we refine here is for local demand, and to some extent, since we're close to the border, we may also trade it across the border with the nearby U.S. states. But that said, again, it all comes down to the economics. Does it make economic sense to build these refineries, and is that a profitable proposition to the investors? And the answer is it just isn't. It's a low margin business. When you're looking at the forecast for oil demand, for the next 30, 40 years, it's not going to be growing. We're sitting on potentially a glut of oil that's going to depress prices. There is simply not going to be the demand as population growth is slowing down all around the world. We're not going to see a whole lot of new demand from that side, and we're not going to be seeing more demand from oil because we're using more cars, because we see many jurisdictions such as China moving very aggressively towards adopting electric vehicles. So this is going to lower the demand for oil products in the long term. All of that combined means the business case for building new refineries is pretty weak.
Werner Antweiler is my guest, associate professor and chair of the Strategy and Business Economics Division at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Our question this hour: does the U.S. action in Venezuela put more pressure on Canada to build a new pipeline to BC's coast? That has been the proposal from the Alberta government. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has weighed in, as well as the opposition leader, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, calling on Canada to approve such a pipeline. What do you think? Is there more pressure for that? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Email bctoday@cbc.ca. Our next caller now is Kent we've just finished with Kent. Ben is joining us now from Fort St. John. Hi there, Ben. Thanks for calling.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, what are your thoughts? Is there more pressure for a pipeline?
Well, you know what? I don't think there's any more pressure on Canada to build a pipeline. There's definitely more pressure on the BC government, I think, to relent and to kind of get with the program and take a really big reality check as to where we're at. That's just a comment. I don't really have anything to expand on that. But I think one of the things that's really disconcerting for me are the people that are poo-pooing the threat of Venezuelan oil. And I think that, sometime back in the mid-2000s, there was a boardroom in Ontario led by Jim Balsillie and his chief executives that basically poo-pooed the threat of iPhones and Apple. Saying,
to BlackBerry.
BlackBerry has the superior encryption system. BlackBerry has all the competitive advantages. And they basically just said, bring it on, whatever. And 3 years later, they were basically out of business.
Okay.
And you know what? The Canadian oil industry right now, if it's going to take, say, 10 years for Venezuela to get up to full capacity to start actually hurting Canadian oil, that gives us 10 years to get all of our ducks in a row. And the thing is, if we don't get our ducks in a row, and in 10 years, there's 2.5 million or 3 million barrels of Venezuelan oil flowing, and we say, oh, no, we better get on top of this, it's too late.
Ben, thank you very much for the call. I'm just going to jump in here for time as we are running out of time and coming close to the news update. Good to hear from you, Ben, in Fort St. John. Our numbers again, 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. As we wrap up here with Werner Antweiler, we're going to be speaking with the regional chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations in a few minutes from now, about 10 minutes from now. They've been strongly opposed to a proposed pipeline to the coast. There was a memorandum of understanding back in November between the Alberta government and Ottawa, the federal government, to pave the way for such a pipeline. It's been an ongoing debate, right, for months now. As you said, there doesn't seem to be anything new because in light of the news out of Venezuela. But does this actually, what kind of wrench does this throw into the discussion now?
Well, what we have seen here in BC is a strong resistance from coastal Indigenous communities against any new pipeline on the northern route. And that brings up the question that the Premier actually raised. What about the Trans Mountain pipeline that is not even at full capacity? There is a strong case to be made to actually look at improving the utilization of this pipeline and making sure that the tankers that are loading up in Burnaby actually can go to their full capacity. So these are kind of the low-hanging fruit of actually making use of the infrastructure we have and allowing some more Albertan oil to reach international markets.
I have a question here for you, and I'll go to it after the news update. If you're okay to stay with us, Werner?
Yes.
It's a question from Isabel in Kelowna. I want to make sure that we get an answer from you, and she will pose it right after the news update. It is 12:31 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for being with us. We'll take more of your calls, and we'll hear from a reporter in Calgary as well as about how Albertans are reflecting on this and reacting to the news. And as well, we'll hear from Regional Chief Terry Teegee coming up in about 15 minutes from now. Right now, it is time for a CBC News Update, and here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Premier David Eby has announced a trade mission to India this week in an effort to diversify trade. A small delegation, including Jobs Minister Ravi Kalam, will visit New Delhi, Punjab, Mumbai, and Bangalore. Eby says the trip will focus on diversifying trade for BC's LNG and forestry sectors. Police have made an arrest in an investigation into a suspicious death in Greater Victoria. Saanich police say the death happened in a home on Blair Avenue yesterday. They haven't provided any information about the person in custody, but believe it was an isolated incident. And a 35-year-old woman has pleaded guilty to attacking several people in and around Vancouver's seawall in the Yaletown neighborhood. Tamara Hamlin was arrested October 10th, 2 days after the random attacks. Altogether, 7 people were assaulted, including 3 who required treatment in hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. And now the forecast. Rainfall warnings continue for sections of Metro Vancouver, and snowfall warnings are in place for the West Columbia, Whistler, as well as sections of the Coquihalla, Highway 3, and the Trans-Canada. Elsewhere on the north coast, a high of -2 this afternoon with flurries, highs to +2 and clearing in the Peace. In the central interior, flurries with a high of -1, highs around 0 with snow and rain in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, cloudy this afternoon with a high of 2. And here on the south coast, lots of rain, snow at higher elevations with highs around 6. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. And let's go back to our phone lines now. And Isabel is in Kelowna with a question for our guest, Werner Antweiler at UBC. Hi, Isabel.
Hello, and thank you, Dr. Antweiler, for taking my call. I know that we need to be quick about this, and my question is this. It seems to me that ever since Trump has started saber-rattling with respect to tariffs, and obviously the most recent move in Venezuela, the conversation always comes down to oil specifically, and oil from Alberta. At what point do we need to expand our imagination a little bit to consider the need for development of other forms of energy resources in Canada? We know the Alberta government put in a moratorium on the development of renewables a few years ago, but we've got a wealth of renewable resources that we can draw upon, and I'm surprised that this never seems to fit into the conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
And you're talking about energy that is not oil and gas. So we talk about, for example, BC is pursuing LNG. Is that something that you would consider an alternative or no?
Could be LNG, could be hydroelectric, could be solar and wind, where my understanding is we have an abundance of possibilities on that front. It could be tidal out east, it is bizarre to me that we keep talking only about oil and gas.
Interesting point, Isabel. Thank you very much. We actually have a tweet, a TikTok comment from Retro Raven. A similar point. We can't be still pushing oil products. More money should go into clean energy research. Okay, so thank you very much for the call from Kelowna. That's Isabel joining us as we take your calls, asking you, does the U.S. action in Venezuela put more pressure on Canada to build a new pipeline to BC's coast to diversify oil export markets? Our numbers again, 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733. And my guest is Werner Antweiler, chair of the Strategy and Business Economics Division at UBC Sauder School of Business. We just heard a question that why are we not talking about alternative energy resources then? The focus has been so much on oil. So what do you make of that, Werner?
I really appreciate that question from Isabel, because we are an energy powerhouse, not just in oil and gas, but also in renewable energy. We have a lot of untapped resources that allow us to build out solar and wind, in particular wind in Canada and places like Alberta. That actually could allow us to export more electricity essentially to our southern neighbor, who they are needing more and more energy for various kinds of purposes, and we can supply cleaner energy going forward. We also need more infrastructure to transmit electricity across provincial boundaries. So the system that we have is a little outdated, and it could really help from a boost in investment in new infrastructure, connecting our grid, allowing us to produce more renewable energy to power our future, whether it is to power electric vehicles or heat pumps, but also here in BC, a lot of new energy will be needed to power the electrification of LNG exports. All that needs more electricity, more clean energy, and I think that is a very important part of the discussion we need to have.
Werner, it's always good to speak with you. Thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure.
Werner Antweiler, Associate Professor and Chair of the Strategy and Business Economics Division. That's at UBC Sauder School of Business. It's 12:37 now. You're with BC Today as we take your calls. What do you think? Does the U.S. action in Venezuela put pressure on Canada to build that proposed pipeline from Alberta to BC's coast? We heard the reaction from Premier David Eby this morning. Our numbers again, 604-669-3733. And of course, Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith says, yes, it does underline the urgency for a new pipeline and to get Alberta's oil and Canada's oil to Asian markets. And for more now on the reaction from Alberta and Canada's, from Alberta, we're joined now from CBC business reporter based in Calgary, Paula Duhatschek. Hello, thanks very much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good to have you. What is the sense that you're seeing in Alberta right now, Paula?
Well, I think naturally there is some concern. As you mentioned, Venezuela does have the world's largest oil reserve, and it just so happens that it produces the exact same type of heavy crude that is produced in Western Canada, and that right now is largely exported to the U.S. So naturally, concern again that an uptick in Venezuelan oil production would mean competition for Canadian crude, especially for a small but significant portion of Canadian exports that are currently sent to refineries in the Gulf Coast. Now, yesterday, we did see Canadian energy stocks fall after news broke about the upheaval in Venezuela. They have since rebounded somewhat, although not all of them fully. And as you mentioned, of course, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith taking the opportunity to weigh in about all this, saying that this is just yet another reason why she believes we need to find new export markets outside the U.S. And of course, for her, key to that is building a new oil pipeline to the Northwest Coast.
We've just been discussing how realistic is a threat to Canada's oil producers. We've been hearing it would take years to build up and revitalize and rebuild that infrastructure, as well upwards of $100 billion US. How realistic is that threat from a resurgence of Venezuelan oil?
Well, you are exactly right. This would take a lot of time and a lot of money to really see their industry rebound to a degree where it would become a really realistic competitor with Canada. And again, analysts say the competition between Canada and Venezuela would likely be for the share of exports that are sent to refineries on the Gulf Coast. According to the Service Credit Union, that is about 10% of Canadian oil exports. So it's not nothing, but it's also certainly not the majority. And while Venezuela may have significant oil reserves, right now the country produces less than 1 million barrels of oil per day. For context, Canada produces nearly 5 million barrels per day. So they have a long ways to go to ramp up production to the degree where it would come close to Canada. And experts say there also might be some reluctance among private companies to spend the time and the money that would be needed to do that, especially given the ongoing political instability in the region.
Now, this morning, Paula, Prime Minister Mark Carney was asked about this, and he said that MOU that was signed with Alberta, that's part of the whole infrastructure plan. Where does that pipeline proposal stand now since the signing of that MOU?
Well, there haven't been a lot of significant updates. We did have a bit of news locally last week. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith told our paper, the Calgary Herald, that they're looking at 3 possible routes. One that could potentially include moving oil into the lower BC mainland. But again, I want to emphasize that much of this conversation is still pretty speculative at the moment. We haven't seen a private sector proponent step forward yet. The government of Alberta here just in the last few minutes put out a news release saying that they're going to launch a website soon where the public can take a look at news and updates on the MOU. So certainly I expect they'll see lots of clicks on that in the next few days. But otherwise, we are just waiting for Canada Day, which is when Alberta says that it plans to submit this project to the Federal Major Projects Office. And between now and then, lots can happen, Michelle.
Paula, good to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paula Duhatschek, CBC business reporter based in Calgary. We are going to go to more of your calls in a couple of moments, but as I mentioned, BC's coastal First Nations have been strongly opposed to a proposed new pipeline, and Terry Teegee is the regional chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations and joins me now. Good afternoon, Chief Teegee. Thanks so much for being with us. Chief Teegee, are you there? I think we have Chief Teegee now. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm wondering if you sense that urgency that we have heard from the Alberta Premier, from the Conservative leader, that and other energy analysts as well, that there is this new pressure underlining the urgency for this new pipeline. Pierre Poilievre said, the race has begun in his letter. Venezuela's re-entry to American markets means time is running out. Does this at all affect the position of First Nations on BC's coast when it comes to a new pipeline?
Well, as far as I know, the position from coastal First Nations and many First Nations hasn't changed. I think it seems to me that there's new pressures all the time, including this not only from the Trump administration, but once again from another I suppose, existential crisis, which could be Venezuela oil coming onto the market. Mm-hmm. I think it's a long way off. I mean, the existing infrastructure in Venezuela isn't up to, as your previous guests have stated, can't compete with Canada right now. And further to that is the existing infrastructure that Canada already has. TMX isn't utilized to its fullest potential. So I think there's other issues out there that we have no control over, and nor does any other country. Who's to say that if a new administration, new government comes into Venezuela, that worst case scenario, perhaps there would be a civil war, perhaps there would be other issues that Venezuela has to deal with, especially as a country in its current condition.
And so how concerned are you then, or what are your thoughts on the potential for a threat to Canada's overall economy? If it's not, in the short term anyway, a threat to the oil producers, does it affect Canada's position, for example, in negotiating a new trade deal with the United States? How concerned are you about that?
Well, I think, First Nations should be at the table, especially if it does affect our people. We were at the table during the first discussions of NAFTA 2 or CUSMA. I think, those discussions need to happen in regards to the renewal of CUSMA. I think, in terms of decisions that need to be made, especially in terms of energy, there's a number of projects that will be coming online in British Columbia in terms of alternative energy projects that are really in partnership with First Nations, or perhaps are driven by First Nations, and those decisions are being made by First Nations. So I think if there's any discussions of an oil pipeline or any other infrastructure, First Nations need to be a part of the decision-making process. And these international crises that we're seeing now shouldn't be on the backs of First Nations. We're seeing some real disturbing rhetoric about Greenland. What about the Indigenous peoples there? I think it's really important to have Indigenous peoples at these tables, especially if there's really, I suppose, an existential crisis that is the Trump administration.
And finally, Chief Teegee, you talk about First Nations being at the table. One thing we heard with the Energy Memorandum of Understanding was that a pipeline, if it is approved under the Building Canada Act, and if there are opportunities for Indigenous co-ownership and economic benefits, that Canada could then, think about possibly adjusting the oil tanker ban off the North Coast. I'm wondering if since November there have been any further discussions with First Nations in BC about this proposal?
I'm not sure. I'm not aware if Prime Minister Carney or any of his delegation or ministers have met with coastal First Nations. They certainly haven't met with myself, but I'm not really the decision maker here. I think those First Nations that are affected by a pipeline development or in terms of tanker traffic need to be at the table. And as many of your guests and perhaps people who have called in have talked about, there are other major projects out there that should be really paid attention to, as Premier Eby, I suppose, said previously in the months leading up to these important discussions in regards to infrastructure.
Very good to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome.
Teegee is the regional chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations. Let's take more of your calls now then. And on the line, joining us is Chris in Victoria. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. Go ahead. Loud and clear.
So first of all, I want to say I appreciate Chief Teegee's perspective there and really liked what he had to say. I think that it's already been noted that it's going to take many years to get Venezuela's oil production up and running. And as we know, oil and gas is a resource that, albeit slowly, is being phased out across a lot of the world. Most of the first callers that were on this show, and too many other Canadians, in my opinion, have their economic heads stuck in the past and are trying to hold on to a commodity that is becoming phased out and less attractive to the world year over year. I'm not saying we need to stop the current flow of oil and gas, but I don't think we need to invest more in it. And as one of the previous experts said, the Trans Mountain Pipeline isn't even running at full capacity. I think fast-tracking a pipeline to BC doesn't make any sense. We should be following the lead of the rest of the world and divesting from oil and gas and fossil fuels and focusing on investing in renewable energies and increasing our electrical capacity, because that is the currency of the future, not oil and gas.
Chris, thank you so much for the call from Victoria. Devo is up next now in Vancouver. Your thoughts on, is there now more pressure for a new pipeline to BC's coast? Go ahead, Devo.
Yeah, well, one of the things is that, a lot of people forget, we have so many pipes that are in the ground already that there's probably pipes that are sitting empty that probably can be used. Now they might not be, a 36-inch or a 48-inch pipe for spec, but there are pipes that are already sitting there in the ground. The other thing, talking about the refineries, and I know this for a fact, is that oil companies, they don't want to make that investment in refineries because they know that they're just white elephants. They're going to be mothballed within 60 years. So they're not going to make that type of investment. And China right now has come up with some technology for more efficient solar panels. So in the future, they're not going to need not just the oil, but the coal. So Roberts Bank is going to be a ghost town.
Devo, thank you. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So anyways, so the pressure to build more pipelines is sort of ridiculous because the alternative energy is going to, go by leaps and bounds over the next 50, 60 years. It's going to be like the horse and carriage and cars. Same thing.
Devo, thank you very much. I was pausing when you said China there, because that was a point that Werner Antweiler made as well when it comes to where they are turning their attention to and alternative energy resources there. Thank you so much for the call, Devo, in Vancouver. And let's head to Chetwynd now. Carol is on the line next. What are your thoughts on a new pipeline? Is there more pressure now, Carol?
I would believe so. I think the pipeline should go both ways to the east and the west coast. And it's funny they don't talk about having the pipeline going to those refineries in Quebec and New Brunswick, and they put pressure on BC. So I just don't think it's fair, but I think that's safer. I went to look at the Beluga whales and blue whale in the St. Lawrence River 4 or 5 years ago. And you could see those big tankers coming from Greece and Saudi Arabia. They're full of rust, and they look like an old beat-up ship, and they go to the St. Lawrence River, and there's nobody, no environmentalists, doing anything about that. If one of those tankers would spill, there'd be no more belugas and no more blue whales, and especially what happened in Lake Megantic with those trains. The trains with all the tankers, they go to the Fraser River here, along the Skeena Rivers, and nobody says nothing about that. I think a pipeline is much safer and faster, and enough talks about it. We should just go ahead and build it, and Matt Carney should put pressure in Quebec to have the pipeline going that way too, and to be independent here in Canada, not to wait for the U.S. and everybody else. And it's just my talk.
Carol?
And, yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking one more thing about the Venezuela attack there, or the kidnapping. I feel that Mr. Trump, I call him Mr. Trump because, anyway, I feel that it took all the pressure away from Epstein. All we talk about is Venezuela. He doesn't have to worry about the Epstein file anymore. It's just my take on that.
Carol, thank you very much for the call. And speaking of, again, bringing up the Energy East pipeline that was to go to the eastern part of the country, that again was canceled in 2017. An interesting email here from Herbert as well in Courtney, who writes, your question appears to be economic. Consider the politics. Production in Venezuela requires stability. What happens when Machado returns and demands an election that she would win? Think she would turn over the oil to the U.S.? I doubt it. That comment on the politics and political stability. A lot of uncertainty, of course, right now in Venezuela. So, Herbert, thank you for your email. bctoday@cbc.ca. I see lots of emails coming in now and lots of calls as well. And our numbers, again, 604-669-3733. Chris is up next in Castlegar. Your thoughts on a new pipeline, Chris?
Oh, hi, Michelle. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
You know, I have to agree with what the other Chris had said. And I was listening to the discussion that seemed to focus, the energy discussion, and focus so much on oil. And I'm looking out here in my window in Castlegar, and normally at this time of the year, there's a foot of snow on the ground. And for the first 10 years I lived here, from 2012 to a couple of years ago, there was always snow at Christmas and snow at New Year's. I know that there isn't any. Like, it's up in the hills, but there's none here. And that was the same last year. And that's one thing, you know, like the skiers don't like it when they're, you know, when the snow is not reliable in the winter. And so there's all that ski industry. But also, like, more of a problem has been the fact that we're getting these very hot summers. Like last summer, we had 17 days in a row here in Castlegar where the temperature was above 35 degrees, which I don't believe had ever happened before. And then we had a disastrous fire up in the Slocan Valley and up in the north part of Kootenay Lake. It was burning some beautiful old growth forests in that case. So, like, how long are we going to like keep this oil and gas fantasy going? And the second point I want to make is that out in Hecate Strait, it's very shallow. It's quite a large area. It's very shallow, for which reason it's quite dangerous. But it's also very windy. There's a lot of storms there. So it would seem like there's a great potential for wind power. So I went on the chatbot and checked out just how much potential wind power is there. And it came up with 20 gigabytes. That's 20 nuclear power stations. So I know the logistics involved in transferring all that power to where it can be used would be quite complex. But I mean, if we need a national project, there's one right there. They already have 14 gigs in the North Sea. So
I hear you, Chris. I'm going to jump in. I'm so sorry, only because our next caller is going to pick up on that, okay? So thank you very much for the call in Castlegar, talking about pursuing wind and alternative energy. And Mohammed is calling us now from Victoria. Go ahead, Mohammed. You wanted to jump on that point.
Yes, hi, thank you. Yeah, I think this is a prime example of where we need to shift towards renewable resources, wind power, solar, I mean, we can put up incredible amounts of wind and solar power across this country. And once it's established, for wind power, there's a little more maintenance involved, but solar, it is essentially free power. This will eliminate these wars over resources where we will have plenty of power and energy to run a lot of the things that we need. We have to start looking ahead and stop looking behind. And I understand it doesn't happen instantly. It takes time. So we'd have to transition this in while we start slowly reducing our dependence on oil and gas.
Mohammed, thank you as well. I have time to squeeze in one last caller, and Scott in Victoria. Your thoughts? Is there more pressure for a new pipeline?
Absolutely not. Same as the last couple of callers. Hey, look, China has already made the switch. They're the big players. 1,000-kilometer cars on a charge. It's going to be cheap transportation coming really soon if we let it in. The pipeline, that's 100-year-old thinking, right? The U.S. can spool up massive amounts of resources to get that pipeline flowing crude, put in tankers within a year. Look what they did during World War II, and that's almost a century ago. So I don't believe this Canada thinking of 10 years to get it to market. No way. It'll be to market a lot sooner than that. I say within a year they'll have some tankers full of crude from Venezuela. So Canada's got to get off this 100-year-old century thinking and move forward. Otherwise, we're going to be in big trouble. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, Scott, and glad we got you in as well. We got through all of our callers today. Thank you so much for weighing in. One last email here from Mar in Victoria. Coastal nations will never approve of another pipeline crossing their sacred land. PM Carney accepted Bloc Québécois, saying that no pipeline would cross Quebec to reach the East Coast. I think Premier Smith has too much of a hold on the country, and BC needs to be seen as equal and not a province to be bullied. There is no desperation from anywhere for more oil. Thank you so much for your email as well. bctoday@cbc.ca. And lots of your thoughts coming in. You can keep sending them in. We'll put them